Aloha, everybody. Today we're going to talk about betrayal. Betrayal and how to avoid it. I actually wanted to talk about betrayal probably a month, 2 months ago, but it's a hard topic to talk about. And even as I was practicing this topic, I found it hard because it can bring up a lot of emotions, a lot of old emotions. So I don't know how to get this light out of my eyes, but here, let's see if this will work. There. It's not as good, but whatever. Okay, so betrayal. Betrayal. You know, actually betrayal happens a lot, and not just in big ways, but in small ways. Like, for example, when you open up your credit card bill and there's a recurring charge on there that wasn't supposed to be there, and then you have to figure out how to take care of it. Or, you know, your cell phone bill, there's like a weird charge on there that, you know, you didn't agree to. Those are kind of tiny betrayals, like where things kind of get slipped in without your consent. But what I want to talk about is the big betrayal. The ones that change your life, the ones that change who you are, the ones that change your faith in life, your faith in yourself, your faith in other people. That is the betrayal that we're going to talk about today, because it'd be great not to have to go through it. So, let's see, what is the next? Okay, so the biggest betrayal in my life, of course, was my divorce after being married for 18 years. And I didn't see it coming. Now, that doesn't mean that other people didn't see it coming, but I didn't see it coming. And it was a huge betrayal. And part of the reason it was so big is because my husband, my second husband, was the first person I ever really bonded with. I ever really felt really connected to. And we had a very strong connection, like a magnetic connection. So my feeling about our marriage was that it would just be, you know, we wouldn't get divorced, and that it would just be great from beginning to end. And if we got into trouble, if we had trouble in our marriage, that we would do whatever it took to fix it. And that didn't happen, and that's where the betrayal came in. So I want to talk, and the thing about these kinds of betrayals, I think people try to downplay them, but if you actually look at what it takes to recover from this kind of a betrayal, from my point of view, it's second in intensity to death of a spouse. So it's not the death of your spouse, but it's like the death of your relationship, or the death of your idea of that relationship. And it's a very powerful experience, and it can be very hard to recover from, especially if you're trying to do it all by yourself. And sometimes even with therapy, like in my case, I actually had a therapist, but I was like not in a headspace to like have this recovery take a long time. So I was like, I was in a hurry. That's all I can say. And therapy, the pace of therapy was too slow, I felt. So let's talk about the anatomy of betrayal, because if we can look at what makes up betrayal, it will help us understand it and figure out how we can avoid it. So the first thing that you need to have betrayal is some unquestioned ideas, beliefs, expectations, and roles. So we've talked about cultural conditioning, how your culture of origin is in full swing when you're born. It has traditions, expectations, and roles. And because we are dependent on our family of origin, who buys into the culture to some degree or another, we really don't have the ability to think critically about, you know, does this culture work for me, or can I shape this culture? So thank goodness when you get to be an adult, you do have this chance. And if you're a very enlightened parent, you can actually teach this to your children when they're younger. So when I thought of marriage, back when I was married and before I was married, I had certain expectations of what that relationship would look like, what my husband would do in that relationship, and what I would do. And I had certain expectations of myself in the relationship. And so the first thing is we have these unquestioned beliefs and expectations. Now we might like grow up and see our parents and say, you know, well, I don't want that. But that's not the same thing as actually questioning roles and expectations and getting clear on what you think is right compared to what the culture says you could do, or the default. So my former husband had expectations of me that I was totally unwilling to do. And some of these expectations were to, how can I put this? Like if we had plans and he got a better invitation, his expectation of me is that I would just say, oh, sure, go do that thing. And that is not something that I would do. Not then anyway. So, and he had the expectation that the relationship or the management of that relationship mostly fell on me. Like keeping it healthy and vibrant mostly fell on me. And to be honest, I actually shared that expectation with him, even though I didn't care for it. So, so he had his expectations of me and I had mine of him. And my expectation would have been that when we make plans to do something together, you honor those plans. So we were at cross purposes. And there were a million other little ways where our expectations were just not in alignment. So the second part of this equation of betrayal is the reality. And I just alluded to that reality. That's like the actual behavioral data of what happens day to day. So if I have an expectation that my husband should bring me flowers, say once a week or time to time, and he doesn't, I can see that my expectation and the reality are off. And what happens when you find yourself in a betrayal situation is that you're trying to overlook the data. So instead of like just really facing it and saying, oh, these expectations do not match these behaviors, you just don't do it. And that is why, like in my case, I felt blindsided by the end of my relationship because I was ignoring the data. And that leads to the third component of betrayal, which is magical thinking or denial, where you think that the situation will just somehow fix itself, or that person will just come through in the end, or that love conquers all of these cultural beliefs we have. And the reason we stay there is because we have a fear of the unknown. So if I look at that data, I'm going to make it mean something. Like I'm going to make it mean I have to get a divorce, or you know, and what will that mean? It'll mean I'll no longer be in a relationship and I'll suffer some intense emotions, especially if you don't have emotional intelligence. And there's this big unknown, and that's why we ignore the data. That's why we grab onto magical thinking. It's why we go into denial. So let's talk about how you avoid betrayal, because that's really where life gets interesting. It gets interesting when you can see things coming, and when you can make the kind of course corrections that are in alignment with your integrity and make you feel good about who you are. Because the worst thing about betrayal is it makes you feel terrible about who you are. You know, it makes you, I mean, we can complain all we want about the other person and their shortcomings, but when it comes down to it, the most painful part of betrayal is that we realize we can't trust ourselves. So let's go through how to prevent betrayal. So the first thing is to be clear on what you want in relationships and what you're willing to give and do. And this, the hard part about this, you may actually want to do a lot of things that are that have a lot of cultural energy in it. Like you may think those things are fine, and that's fine. It's your life, whatever you want to do, it's up to you. But when you want to deviate, like let's say you're a woman who really would love to be in a relationship, but you don't want to do all of the emotional labor. You don't want to do that emotional heavy lifting. You don't want to be a caretaker. You don't want any of those things. That is going against a lot of cultural conditioning, although that's changing. So what you need to do is don't cave into social pressure, because when you come across a lot of people who haven't figured out what they want and they're defaulting to the culture, you'll be tempted to just think, oh, this is hopeless. But the reality is, when you decide that that is what you want and you won't accept anything else, that's what you're going to get. So be fearless in what you want. And if you don't get results right away, it doesn't mean you're not going to get it. And you just want to make it clear that this is what you really want. If you're like a person who believes in manifesting, what you would say, it's like you were telling the universe, this is what I am open to, this is what I'm available for, and nothing else. And then the second way to prevent betrayal is the reality check. So when you're with people and you're in relationships with people, you have to compare their behavior to what you really want in a relationship and what you're willing to do and what you're willing to invest in. And the reason we don't do that is sometimes we get in relationships and everybody is on their best behavior in the beginning. And then as time goes on, it becomes harder to always be whatever you're trying to present, because it's not really you, because you're a unique person. You're changing all the time. You're learning, you're growing, your needs change, your desires change. So we're sometimes afraid to do this reality check because we're already in a relationship or we have high hopes for it. We've already planned it out in our mind. Without the person's consent, our mind will just run with it. And then when we get this data and it's not matching up, we start to become fearful and throw a little tantrum, this is what you wanted, right? But it's not exactly what you wanted. So if you want to avoid betrayal, you have to be ruthless about the data. You really have to look at it. And the earlier and the sooner you look at it, the better. So before you start running off in your mind, planning your wedding, planning your life and everything that you're going to do, it's a much better strategy to look at the data, look at what's happening right now, look at what you really want, and are these behaviors congruent? And if they're not completely congruent, is there a way that works for both people to get them to be more congruent? So the last factor is to course correct. And you would do this instead of magical thinking. So how would you do this? How do you course correct? This is what a big part of what I teach at the Emotional Intelligence School is all of these skills of course correcting, of course, tapping into the wisdom of your emotions, but also how to ask questions so that you can have more clarity. How do you communicate a boundary, and how do you follow through on those boundaries, and how do you communicate respectfully? All of these things. So what you'll find as your emotional intelligence becomes more skillful and more aligned is that your course corrections will get very small, and they'll get very kind and very respectful. This reminds me of a story Stephen Covey used to tell about how on a flight plan, when an airplane is going from point A to point B, there's a whole flight plan, and the whole way the pilots are course correcting. So most of the time, the plane is actually not on course. They just spend all of their time getting it back on course so that it'll get to its destination. And that is what you want to do to avoid betrayal. You want to make those course corrections based on the data, and you want to be clear about those roles and what you're willing to do in a relationship. And that's going to change too. You know, you can start with basic ideas of what you want, and it's so individual. It depends on the person you're with. I mean, I know that you've noticed that sometimes you're with something and something they do works, whereas with another person, it doesn't work. And there's no, you know, it's just the combination of you and that other person. So let's talk about the cultural context. Imagine if a great majority of us had these skills, the skill of emotional intelligence, these course correcting skills like communication, boundaries, clarifying questions. That would make this culture so much more functional. And it would be so amazing. We would have much less drama in our culture. We'd have much less violence, much less confusion, and a lot more harmony. And I am very passionate about teaching women to have these skills. And a lot of women have these skills, but to really hone these skills and to really make them second nature so that your relationships and your interactions go well. Now, that doesn't mean everything will work out the way you want it to, but what it does mean is that you can be very happy and proud of the way that you interact with other people. And that is a big deal, my friends, because I know that we've all had the experience of losing our temper or being blindsided or being betrayed, and the way that we react to that result is sometimes as painful as the result itself. So my goal at the Emotional Intelligence School is to teach women to have these skills so that they feel wonderful, they feel amazing, and they are very proud and happy with themselves, happy with the way that they do life. So I'm going to talk to you about who should consider contacting me about learning these skills. If you are serious about having these kind of skills so that you have what you need to create your own version of happily ever after, you should definitely reach out. If you're ready to invest in yourself, you know, women in our culture are not, we're taught to invest in our looks, but not necessarily to invest in our own self-development and in our own happiness. So if you see the value of investing in yourself to get this result, then you should definitely reach out. And I would say another excellent, maybe the most excellent reason for reaching out would be that you're in a hurry. Remember, I was in a hurry with my therapist. I can't think of anything better than hacking time, because time is not a renewable resource. So if you can cut down your learning curve on something, it leverages everything. Because just think of like investing in the stock market. It's all about starting and compounding over time. And if you invest in yourself now and you learn these skills, it's going to compound. It's going to reach into all areas of your life. It's going to help you in your career. It's going to help you in your relationships, your friendships, your partnership. And it will also seriously cut down on the amount of personal resistance and negativity that you may have. And if you, I mean, most of us have it, and a big reason for that is that our culture thinks it's normal and doesn't really address it in any way. But it's not something that has to be by any means, and it's kind of a shame that it's so accepted. So if you are someone who can relate to those three things that I just laid out for you, you should go to my website, theemotionalintelligenceschool.com, and there's a contact tab at the top. You can click on it and you can shoot me an email, and I will read your email. You can tell me why you're reaching out, and we'll set aside a time to talk to each other for about 30 minutes. And I'll get to learn about what you want in your life, and I'll get an idea of where you are and what kind of skills you are likely to need to develop, and which ones you already have. And I will help you put all of that together into a plan. And if you feel like we have a good connection and you like what I can offer you and what I've been offering in these videos, then I'll make an offer to you to work together. So I want to thank you for joining me today for this show, for the Emotional Intelligence School Weekly Facebook Live. And I would love to wish you an amazing weekend. And please join me next week, same time, Thursday, 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Aloha.